Market Journal, television for agricultural business decisions, is a presentation of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine.
Hello everyone, I'm Alex Wojcicki in for Bryce Duskett. Thanks so much for joining us today on Market Journal. We've got a lot of information to cover, so let's jump right into this week's program. Last week, we gave you some updates on the upcoming open house at the Gudmundsen Sandhills Laboratory that will take place on August 24th. That event is sandwiched right between two other informative field day opportunities for those in the western part of the state. On Tuesday, August 23rd, producers can take part in the 2022 Panhandle Ag Research and Technology Tour. This event is being presented by Nebraska Extension in partnership with the Nebraska Dry Bean Growers Association. It will highlight up-to-date research on dry beans and other crops. The day will include detailed tours of crop research plots, plus indoor presentations. Plot tour topics will include managing pollinators, using cover crops and rotational strategies for weed control in dry beans, and sensor-based irrigation management practices. As for the indoor presentations, guests will receive updates on the ag economy, climate-smart commodity production, and detection of white mold in dry beans. If you would like to attend this event, it is free of charge and will take place again on Tuesday, August 23rd. Registration begins at 8:30 a.m. Mountain Daylight Time with tours beginning at 9. Lunch will be provided at no cost to attendees. And for more information, you can call 308-632-1230. We've also added an informative link to the Market Journal website. Well, on Thursday, August 25th, the West Central Research Extension and Education Center in North Platte will be hosting the 2022 Water, Crops, and Soil Health Field Day. Attendees will meet with and hear from Nebraska Extension educators, specialists, and industry experts on issues related to soil health and other ag issues. This year's two-track focus will involve several sessions and in-field demonstrations of soil health trials. There will also be a producer panel and discussion based around addressing current challenges in ag, including global supply chain issues. Attendees will get insight from industry experts that will give a look into the future of fertilizer and ag chemical availability for the next year. Producers who attend this event are encouraged to share the challenges they're facing on their operations. They say this will help industry experts formulate some ideas on how to confront those challenges moving forward. Again, this event will take place on Thursday, August 25th at the West Central Research Extension and Education Center in North Platte. Registration for this event is requested by Monday, August 22nd to help in planning for lunches, so you just still have a couple of days to get that registered. More information on the event and registration can be found at go.unl.edu/pknc. We've also posted that link along with this story on the Market Journal website. Turning our attention now over to the grain markets. This week we were joined by commodity trader Doug Simon of Tredas. There was a lot of ground to cover with Doug this week, including his take on this week's trade. Today, our market conversation, we're joined by Doug Simon, commodity trader with Tredas. Doug, let's go back to last week. That WASDE report was released on Friday. Bring us up to speed on how the market reacted to that.
You bet. 11 o'clock, the report came out, and the yield had been at 177 on the national corn yield. They brought that down to 175.4. The bean yield climbed up to 51.9. So that bean yield was a little higher. Everybody was kind of thinking that might have dropped down a little bit, but USDA does farmer surveys. They don't actually go out and do ear counts or weights or anything. They do that in September and October, but those numbers were probably a little bit higher than what the trade guest was thinking on, definitely on the soybeans. So the markets opened up weaker, but as the trading day went along, they kind of looked at some of the world numbers. Actually, the markets kind of rebounded and we finished, positive for a day, and D's corn got back up, towards 640 at one time. So we actually had one of those maybe a little negative reports, but finished with some positivity.
So on the topic of WASDE, we know that weather has been a topic of conversation all year, whether it's right here in the U.S. or across the globe. How is that going to play a role in future WASDE reports?
Well, it's going to be really critical because that yield, even though they've done those surveys right now by phone, there's people out doing commercial evaluations from Pro Farmer and different crop profit, and DTN came out with a yield number last week from Grow Group. I can't remember the final name of it, but they were like 167, and they were using the vegetation indexes. When you looked at those vegetation indexes, there was a lot of variability across the state, and I think if you look at the recent ones from USDA, there's really a dry band across Nebraska, into Iowa, into even a small area of Illinois and Indiana. And when we talk like we're a broker for R.J. O'Brien, the R.J. O'Brien broker network, I mean, there's areas in those areas that they say, yeah, the yields are struggling. Minnesota looks pretty good. Illinois probably has, trend or above trend potential, but there's a lot of problems out in Nebraska. But so the big question is going to be, once the USDA gets out there and does those in-field surveys, what it's going to look like.
Let's take a step back and look at, the past couple of weeks. Of course, markets have been trading a little bit weaker as we sit here on Wednesday. What's your take on those recent prices and recent trends?
Well, we had that good finish last Friday, but then we had rains that were kind of projected. So we did get some rain that came into the Corn Belt. Not widespread, but definitely in some areas, but it cooled off. We were running toward 100 degrees, 95, and now we're back in the 80s, and that's the way it looks like going forward. When you still look at the weather maps going forward, we're still below normal on precip. We're not as hot. So again, it's going to be a question of how is this crop going to finish out? And it's an age-old question, what's that final corn yield going to be? So I think everybody's really anticipating that. But now this week, really with Ukraine shipping out more wheat, and then with Russia, they've got a massive wheat crop. So part of the wheat corridor, or that shipments being allowed out of the Ukraine, is partly in the interest of Russia being able to export their crop as well. So I think that kind of goes hand in hand. Still, you got a big problem in Ukraine with credit being available this next fall for them to plant their crops, because they base that credit on a lot of the contracts that they have. They've got some issues there, so I guess I'm not terribly optimistic about them rebounding their production, but there's also worries about China and the weakness in that economy there too. But I think really it's ultimately going to come down to what's that corn yield going to be and how's it going to turn out.
You had mentioned before we started this program that fund positions are another thing we want to keep our eye on right now. Bring us up to speed on that.
Yeah, we had probably the max fund positions, in corn and beans were both earlier this, back in May timeframe, and they've got about half of that position on. So in some regards, with the market falling off and them getting out of their length, sheds them, at least gives them an opportunity where they at some point could come back in and fill up their plate again. It'd be one thing if they were like chock full of long positions and we're sitting down here, that would be more worrisome, but they've basically got out of that, position. So it also is relating to what's going on in the oil market. Oil's been to $130 this summer. Right now we've fallen back to 87. If you look at the corn and the bean markets, our basis are really tight. The same thing's going on in the oil market. The basis is really firm for what they trade into other countries. So the futures market is weak, but the cash market is on fire. So it tells you something going under, there's good demand longer term. And nat gas, actually, if you look at that, we had highs close to $10 back in June. We fell off pretty hard. Nat gas is actually back up at the all-time highs. I mean, we put in a new high today. It didn't finish there. So when you look at those energy markets, they've still had a lot of volatility, and it's going to have a big bearing on what's going on into the future months.
That's on the fund side. You did tease a little bit that basis. We're looking at it basis levels for old crop and new crop.
Right.
Bring us up to speed on that.
You bet. So we were $1.55, $1.70 over at Columbus, ADM. Blair, is still trading, a positive number up in the 120s, 130s. Columbus is backed off to 90 over, but what's really, so old crop is pretty much gone on corn and beans. I mean, the old crop bean basis has firmed up a little bit because their crush values are still good. But for new crop, because of the drought that we've had, we're going to have less corn out in western Nebraska. We're going to have less corn in eastern Nebraska, but we're also going to be Oklahoma, Kansas, Texas. So a lot of that corn is going to be pulled out of Nebraska back to those feedlots. It's also going to want to be pulled overseas into the export markets. We're going to have that tug of war. So when you look at basis levels where we are today versus a year ago, we're about 30 cents better when we're seeing FOB values versus the West. So we had very strong basis levels, all last year. I would expect that our basis levels again for corn should be pretty positive because those carryouts will be tightened down to the 1.2 to 1.3 billion bushel level. Beans are in that 250 million bushel level, and if we have any drop in our yield there, it's going to tighten up that bean balance sheet. So our basis levels will be very firm. So from our perspective as people that like to hedge, we're still open to being on, be able to trade that basis and being able to look where we want to go to what, end user, and being able to take advantage of those basis opportunities. So last year we kept saying basis was hot, hot, hot. It's still hot, and it's going to be hotter for this year for new crop. So there's going to be, I think, tremendous basis trading opportunities going forward.
Thanks as always to Doug for taking the time to stop in and chat with us. Next week, we'll be joined by Luke Beckman from Central Valley Ag to discuss the markets. So if you have any questions you'd like for us to ask Luke, feel free to email us or get in touch with us on social media, and we'll be sure to pass those questions along. Well, the blue corduroy jacket is one of the most symbolic pieces of FFA membership. Through the Blue Jacket Bright Futures program, the Nebraska FFA Foundation is setting out to provide all deserving Nebraska FFA members with a free jacket and tie or scarf. Stacey Agnew is the executive director of the foundation. She joined us to share more information. Stacey, let's kick off the conversation. For those who aren't familiar, tell us about the Blue Jackets Bright Futures program.
Yeah, so the Blue Jacket Bright Futures program is a program that the Nebraska FFA Foundation has to help to support Nebraska FFA members in earning an FFA jacket of their own.
So this is a way for people who want to support FFA. It directly supports a student. Tell me more about that aspect.
Yeah, so the FFA jacket is pretty iconic. It's this one thing that is a common thread that all FFA members have. It has their name on it. And so that's, I think, really important, is that an FFA member can identify as this is mine versus having a borrowed one or a hand-me-down one. And on the back, it has their FFA chapter, and the rest is pretty standard across the nation. It's that blue corduroy. It has the FFA emblem on it on the front and on the back. And so an FFA jacket is like the uniform, but it's pretty special when students come to their first leadership contest or their first state FFA convention or even national FFA convention. I remember for me, that was the first time I wore my FFA jacket was in Kansas City. And I had this moment of, there are this many other kids just like me that are excited about ag. And so it's a pretty special thing.
I've heard a lot of people say that was the moment when they felt like they finally belonged to something. It's just so powerful. And this program specifically has had a lot of impact. Tell me about that reach.
Yes, it has. So across the state, this supports all chapters that we have. So the impact is, we want to try to raise 400 jackets. Last year we had about 375 jackets that we were able to give out. We had nearly 700 FFA members apply. So we'd like to shorten that gap up a little bit and try to get more jackets in the hands of students who can really benefit from them.
So for folks listening thinking, hey, this is something I can be a part of, I would love to help support a Nebraska FFA, how do they get involved?
Yeah, super easy. So the best way to get involved is you donate. You donate $100 to our Blue Jacket Bright Futures program. And what we do is we raise all that support, and then we actually have a selection process where students apply for the jacket, and students are selected, and then you get a thank you note from the student who actually received the FFA jacket. So that's really cool because you get that handwritten note. And for some students, this is like the first time, like you said, they feel like they're part of something bigger than themselves. And it makes them feel like they've kind of found their home and their place. And so we want lots of students to have that experience, and this jacket program just really helps us to get there, to help those students get there.
For people who have a student in mind saying, hey, this is something that they could benefit from, how do those students get involved?
Yeah, super easy. They just need to talk to their local FFA advisor. There is an online application process on our website that their advisor can direct them to. The deadline for the students is September 15th to get that application in.
Okay, that's for the Blue Jacket Bright Futures program, directly impacting students. Are there other ways to get involved to maybe impact chapters or communities?
Yeah, that's a great question. We also have the I Believe in the Future of Ag campaign. That it's in its 11th year, and that program is all about building local capacity and helping to support local FFA chapters. So not only can you support a student directly with an FFA jacket, but you can also support those chapters directly through the Nebraska FFA Foundation. And we offer $35,000 in matching funds as well. And so it really, as donors, I want them to know that those FFA chapters get 100% back of the donation that they've asked us to give to that chapter, plus more with the $35,000 match. So it's a wonderful program. Both are great programs. I mean, both are definitely impacting students and chapters all across the state at a very, very local level. And so I really think that's important for people here in Nebraska to support those local FFA chapters and to support the students.
All right. Stacey, one last time for people who want to learn more information. Best way to do that?
Best way to do that is to go to our website. So for the jacket campaign, the deadline to donate is September 1st. They need to go online to our website at anyffafoundation.org and make those donations online. The same with the I Believe in the Future of Ag campaign. They can donate at any time. Same thing, same website.
All right, great information as always, Stacey. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
A big thanks to Stacey for joining us in studio. Again, you can find more information at neffafoundation.org. Well, back in 1915, farmers might have been using real horsepower in the form of draft horses or steam tractors or newfangled tractors that ran on multiple fuels like kerosene or gasoline. But since 1977, all farm tractors tested at the Nebraska Tractor Test Laboratory in Lincoln have been diesel-powered. That, though, might be changing as technology evolves on electric-powered vehicles and implements. You can learn more about what horsepower in the field might look like in the future in the August issue of the Nebraska Farmer. It's time once again for a check of the weather with Nebraska Extension ag climatologist and Market Journal chief meteorologist Al Dutcher. Al, we finally saw some scattered precipitation across the state, also a little bit of a cool down. What can we expect in the days ahead?
Well, Alex, we certainly did see some precipitation during this last week, and there was a few isolated spots that seen well over 2 inches, some in the extreme northeastern Nebraska along the Missouri River. The northwestern panhandle did exceptionally well. We had a lot of 1 to 2.5 inch totals for the entire week, and then a couple small pockets in central Nebraska. Unfortunately for a lot of folks, this precipitation event earlier in the week did not pan out nearly as much as was hoped, but we did see some pretty widespread 1/4 inch to 3/4 inch totals in a lot of areas. So a little bit of relief, but not the type of relief that we're looking for in terms of drought busting. Now, as we go forward in time, we're going to be looking at the system that's been moving through the upper Midwest this weekend and potentially another one next week. So as we go to the upper air models, first thing I'll draw your attention to is the cold front that came through the state on Thursday. The upper air low associated with it is basically sitting over southeastern Minnesota. It is expected to slowly drift toward the southeast over this next 2 days. That will keep much of eastern Nebraska in clouds and maybe just a scattering of light shower activity, but the bulk of that moisture will remain to our south and to our east. Then as we go into tomorrow, we start to see the ridge trying to encroach in. We're still going to stay in a relatively cool air mass, temperatures primarily in the eastern 2/3 of the state in the 80s. The heavier precipitation will be along the frontal axis with the trough, heavy precipitation down in Texas, Oklahoma, and the eastern Corn Belt. And then as we get into Monday, we start to see a warmer trend trying to develop, just slowly bringing that warmth from the west to the east. We're still going to be primarily in the middle 80s across the east. We're going to be around the upper 80s to low 90s across the west, and most of the precipitation once again remains to our south. Now on Tuesday, we start to get a little bit of a messier pattern. We do a low pressure system at the surface is expected to develop over South Dakota, and basically we will see a little bit of moisture starting to come up through the central Rockies, but nothing will wrap around the system to speak of. But by Wednesday, we start to see a little trough in the northern stream, and this will work its way toward the southeast. See a little low pressure developing over southeastern South Dakota. This will be the first initial moisture that will come with this system, scattered showers across the northern plains, not much in Nebraska, but by the time we get into next Thursday, we do see this trough starting to carve out an area across the northern plains with low pressure setting up, or expected to set up in northwestern Kansas. That will allow Gulf moisture to be wrapped around this system, and this will spread toward the southeast throughout the day, exiting the state as we get into early Friday as the main trough and energy itself starts to move toward the Great Lakes. Again, here's the low pressure on Friday morning over south central Iowa. That will pull that moisture toward the east of us, and we will see a little bit back up into the Black Hills region, but for the most part, all this precipitation should slide to our south and east. And as we go into the future, next Thursday, the following Tuesday, that cool air will remain in place to our south and to our east as high pressure ridge starts to build to the west. And in terms of precipitation, copious moisture to our south, below lower to our north. We're caught in the middle, so there is a chance, at least from the southwest half of the state, to see a period of above normal moisture. Looking a little bit farther out in the future, this is a preliminary outlook for the month of September, just issued Thursday morning. Below normal moisture across the northern plains, and in terms of precipitation, well above normal, so not the kind of forecast we're looking for.
All right, thanks, Sal. Finally today, we expect a lot from our cattle come breeding season. Anything from providing adequate nutrients for calf growth through lactation to reproductive tract repair and return to estrus prior to the start of breeding season. These expectations are all expected within 90 days of calving to maintain that yearly calving interval. With all of that in mind, there are some considerations that can help animals meet those nutritional requirements at breeding and also ensure a successful breeding season. Market Journal's Mike Straub brings us more on this story.
When moving into breeding season, nutritional consideration for the cow is top priority.
When we think about nutritional considerations and moving into the breeding season, one of the big points that I really like to think about is where cows are at in terms of body condition. And so are cows maintaining and or gaining body condition moving into the breeding season? So the big thing we think about is when cows come through calving, that's a higher nutritional demand coming through calving, and then moving into lactation. So lactational demands are going to require some additional requirements for lactation, which ultimately is going to draw from those body condition reserves. And so making sure that our cows are maintaining is going to be a key when we move into breeding season.
Mid to late gestation is when nutritional requirements start to increase. The highest requirements come at the time of calving and lactation.
When cows go through gestation and thinking about those requirements, mid to late gestation, those requirements are starting to increase. And ultimately, once we get to calving, that's where some of our largest requirements and moving into lactation are going to be. And so cows will move from mid to late gestation. That energy will increase about 25%. And then those protein requirements will increase to about 10%. So we see a large increase in those requirements moving through gestation. And then keep in mind that once we move those animals out to pasture, we may see some changes in body condition for some of those females that may be losing a little bit of condition. So monitor body condition when those cows are out on pasture. And then when you're moving into the breeding season, are those cows maintaining condition at that point? Or do we need to be thinking about increasing that plane of nutrition to help them move through breeding and increase that body condition score?
Monitoring quality of forage is important to making sure your cow gets the nutritional requirement it needs.
When we think about native range, most of the time our forage is going to be pretty high quality at turnout, so around May. And this year it's been a little delayed with the drought in some areas in the Midwest. However, when we start moving through that grazing season, our forage starts to decline a little bit. And so when I think about that quality, most of the time our forage is going to be higher quality early in the grazing season, peak around June, and then start to tail off July into November. And so understanding the quality and quantity is going to be key. And then really thinking about where some of our requirements are in terms of our cows. And so usually around breeding time, that's also where we start to move into peak lactation. So those requirements are going to be increasing. And so making sure that we're around that 7% crude protein in our forages is going to be critical to one, feed the microbes, and then also make sure that those cows are maintaining body condition. So the first thing that we need to be thinking about is most oftentimes our forage is going to provide rumen-degradable protein that is adequate. And rumen-degradable protein is ultimately going to feed our microbes. And so that's kind of our first target, is make sure that those microbes in that rumen are meeting their requirements. Then the next source that we need to be thinking about is metabolizable protein. And so metabolizable protein is going to ultimately go to that cow. And so that's where her supplemental feed is going to, one, feed the microbes, and then help make sure that we're maintaining condition. And so when I think about supplementation, a great way that we can think about this is some targeted rumen undegradable protein sources, where we might use a distiller's cube or a dry distillers or a modified, and be able to figure out what our delivery methods are, but ultimately making sure that we're increasing our energy and making sure that that protein is over 7% to target microbes and then ultimately provide something for those cows.
If forage quality isn't sufficient or there isn't enough to get through fall, it's important to look to different strategies to maintain nutritional needs for the cow.
A few strategies that I would recommend would be potentially looking at early weaning. When we think about early weaning, we usually try to make sure that those calves are at least a couple months old, just to ensure that those rumen are developed and they're on more of a forage-based diet. They still may be consuming some milk, but that transition for those calves can usually be pretty streamlined if we can manage them appropriately. So early weaned calves, that's going to basically start to decrease our lactational demands in those cows. So basically we're taking away that lactational demand, which ultimately is going to reduce their requirements at that point. So a great group of cows that we can target are maybe our younger cows, our 2 and 3 year old cows that, one, are still growing, 2, that we're asking her to lactate maybe once or twice, and this is pretty new for her, right? And so when we think about making sure that we can reduce some of those requirements, early weaning can be something where then we can start to conserve on the forage consumption, because we're either removing those calves and reducing that intake, and ultimately helps us kind of manage that forage a little differently with cows, and then we can manage those calves a little differently on a different pasture, or maybe even bring those calves into a dry lot where we start to get them on a high energy dense feed that ultimately is going to get them on a positive plane of growth and get them transitioning well.
Nutritional requirements are key for a cow through breeding season. Knowing when nutritional needs are at their highest, monitoring quality of forage, and using different strategies can ensure breeding season is successful. Reporting for Market Journal, I'm Mike Straub.
All right, thanks for that information, Mike. If you'd like to get more detailed insights into the subject, we have provided a link to the Beef Watch article from Casey along with this story on the Market Journal website. That is going to do it for this week's show. Remember, if you missed a story, just be sure to subscribe to Market Journal on YouTube. You can also like and follow us on social media to join in on the conversation. Hope to see you right here next week. Until then, I'm Alex Wojcicki, wishing you a safe and productive week.
Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine. Market Journal is produced by the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources.